President Trump has announced he'll impose a 5% tariff on goods from Mexico on Monday if the Mexican government doesn't do more to help stop the flow of illegal immigration into the United States. The plan is raising eyebrows and concerns both here and abroad, and it once again brings into focus the debate about how to handle illegal immigration. Carolee McGrath sat down with Gary Lefort, the Professor Emeritus at American International College, to hear the latest developments.
President Trump is saying is that he has to take some action to correct the immigration problem that we have at the border because Congress just isn't doing anything. So his plan consists of imposing a tariff of 5% that goes into effect June 10th. The reason June 10th is to give Mexico some time to negotiate with the U.S. If an agreement is not reached, then it'll increase by 5% on July 1st, another 5% on the 1st of August, another 5% on September 1st, and finally the last one will be October 1st, which will bring the tariffs up to 25%.
Now, he has said time and time again that Mexico is taking advantage of the U.S. when it comes to the border crisis. What does he want Mexico to do?
He basically wants Mexico to do a better job of securing its southern border that connects with Guatemala, because that's where most of the Central American traffic is coming into the United States. And the situation has not improved at all over the years, even though there's been a lot of dialogue between the two countries about having the need to do something. This past year, it has really become quite critical. For example, as of last year, the number of illegal immigrants coming into the United States was about 396,000. As of March of this year, or I think it's April this year, it's something like 460,000. That's a significant increase.
Up to 1 million. The Border Patrol is saying up to 1 million by the end of this year as well.
They're averaging in the last couple of months close to 100,000 immigrants, illegal immigrants coming into the countries. I think it was something like 98,000 last month, the month before 92,000. Just in the latter part of May, there was a case in El Paso, Texas, where they had the largest mass attempt to enter the United States, where they had basically 1,000 illegal immigrants crossing near the border in El Paso, Texas.
So I know U.S. leaders and Mexican leaders are meeting currently in Washington. What do you expect will come out of that?
Well, from Mexico's perspective, they would like to reach some type of an agreement that would avoid the U.S. imposing a tariff. And the President Obrador feels that a compromise or a deal can be reached. And obviously, it's going to involve increasing the security on the southern border between Mexico and Guatemala. I think Mexico is also going to ask the United States to provide more foreign assistance to the Central American countries of Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, in hopes of addressing some of the political, social, and economic problems in that country that's forcing these immigrants to want to leave their country and eventually migrate through Mexico to the United States. If they can't reach an agreement, then obviously the tariffs goes into effect, and unfortunately I think you'll find that Mexico will probably retaliate in some shape and form as far as U.S. products go.
How will this affect the pending trade deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada? A lot of people have been talking about that.
Well, from the U.S. perspective, it shouldn't at all. Because even though this is labeled as a tariff, and in fact it is, it's not in violation of NAFTA, because what the President is doing, he's using his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to take economic actions in situations where the national security of the United States is jeopardized. And he feels that's the situation on the southern border because the Congress is failing to take any action to improve immigration reform. So he doesn't necessarily see it as a tariff. It is just an action that the U.S. is taking to correct a problem the country is facing. Now, there are obviously others that would disagree with them, for example, on the Democratic side of the Congress. So I think we're just going to have to see what the future brings. I know currently Mexico, the new president has sent the U.S. MCA to the Mexican Senate for approval. I know just last week, Vice President Pence was in Canada doing the exact same thing. I think Canada's in the process of sending it to their Canadian Parliament for approval. So it's just a matter, is the United States going to take appropriate actions or use that as an argument not to take action? So far, the Democrats have not been very, very willing to sit down and negotiate ratification of the USMCA.
Okay, but even members of his own party, even Republicans, talking about the tariff, the current tariff proposal with Mexico, are saying you need to reconsider, being concerned, of course, about businesses and how this would affect the American consumers. How would this affect everyday life?
Well, significantly in many different ways. In 2018, there was about a $82 billion deficit between the United States and Mexico. We were importing from Mexico something like $365 million worth of imports. This year, it's only the beginning of the year. I think as of March, close to $100 million. And so it's going to impact in areas like auto parts, manufactured cars, electronics, food products like avocados, for example, asparagus, cucumbers, tomatoes. It'll impact on oil because we do export about $1 billion worth of oil each month from Mexico. It'll impact in other areas like I mentioned, electronics, TV monitors, computer monitors. We get a lot of household appliances as well. So it is, in fact, going to somewhat impact the United States. But the current president's position is that we have to do something about the border situation. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Congress has failed to take any action to correct the problem. So I do have a responsibility to the American people to do something about the problem. This is the only solution that he currently sees open to him to try to achieve that.
I think a big area of disagreement is the word crisis. The president calls it a crisis on the border. And I know back and forth, Democrats and Republicans have disagreed on that. President Obama called it a humanitarian crisis back in 2014. Why is there disagreement? And do you think, with the introduction of this latest proposal, that there will be movement and that both sides could come together and have some sort of agreement?
Well, unfortunately, it's become very, very, very political, especially the question on illegal immigrants already here in the United States, that some says anywhere between 10 to 15 million people. That's an issue that's has not been addressed in the past. The Democrats would take the position, well, let's create a path to citizenship. The Republicans on the other side says, no, that's not fair to all those other immigrants who have come into the United States legally, has had to wait years to get their citizenship, and you're talking about the possibility of just doing it in a shorter period of time. And so there's always been that political issue.